To get started here, actually, I'll warn everybody. We're doing an experiment with Zoom. It's not going out to anybody else other than us, but we're trying to record it. So, watch out what you say. So your questions will be recorded, but at least what is going on, and in some ways I can't flip through slides. I'll be kind of scrolling through a little bit just because we're trying something out, and we're going to keep trying to get it. What we're hoping to do is to be able to have a Zoom recording that will be able to be stored somewhere, and people that miss it or somebody that you want them to hear it, you can tell them, you need to hear this talk, and or some friend of the family type thing. This is a talk that I've put together over a period of time, and I hope I don't have too many slides on it or some of them too complex, because I actually was storing information myself as I was putting this together. Clearly the biggest problem that's been coming at me in cardiology over the last years has been a problem of insulin resistance, and as we'll go through this a little bit, the story is a little bit about fat, and a little bit about fat being stored where fat shouldn't be stored. But we'll start talking about other issues, and of course, what we've been doing in cardiac rehab, we've been kind of measuring that a little bit. We did body composition analysis with BIA to know both fat and muscle. And there is, I think, some ratio of fat and muscle, at which point a lot of problems start happening. And we're going to go through, as I've kind of tried to figure out, where did all this start and how can we get this back to the root cause and change that and flip that in some ways. So let's talk about fat. What is fat, and why do we need it? Well, fat is a storage location for, that's kind of evolved in evolution, first to keep us warm, number one. The second was to store energy for periods of time when we'd be without food, and that we could, and our body actually has systems where it can shift, its metabolism from where there's breaking down sugars, and where sugars are stored, or breaking down fats, or breaking down muscle. And all of these types of things are part. That was back when food was scarce and there was a lot of activity. Well, what's happened over time is we're kind of living in comfort. We're conditioned air. We're not having to drive places. We don't have to walk as many places. We're in. There's a lot of conveniences that are going on that are reducing our energy expenditure. And of course, we have calories out there. I mean, there's far too many calories that we can get, and of course, some of them are not good. I mean, these ultra-processed foods, snacking, that basically are these low nutrient, high fat, high sugar, high salt, by design, because that's addictive. And then very low fiber, not a lot of health in it, as compared with the healthy whole food, plant-based choices that we wish we could make more of. But there are these things called food deserts, and people live in areas where there's not even a farmer's market or a full grocery store that has anything. So some places people actually eat out of convenience stores or liquor stores even, and the dollar stores are out there, and they're okay for sometimes, not okay other times. Once again, there's just so much available. It's high sugar, high fat, high salt, low in fiber, and this calorie rich and processed bad stuff. So with this, now 91% of America is considered over fat. Namely, we have enough fat that is beginning to affect our health. And so 91%, 69% of children are considered that, and that's just awful. So there, what's the basic requirement? Well, you know, we need about 12 to 1,800 calories a day based on our size, our activities, you know, our general needs. I mean, you look at some of the Olympians, you know, and their 6,000 calorie diets for swimmers, you know, swimming, you know, about 8 miles a day. I mean, that's what they needed to, you know, the Michael Phelps of the world. Well, they get off that training thing, they better cut back on their nutrition a little bit and the calories. But, you know, we basically eat more than we need. And in general, it's about 500 to 600 calories that excess. And, you know, we basically can get meals that even can go from 1,200, even 2,000 calorie meals that are out there. I was amazed at Zaxby's, their salad, if you get their chicken salad, if you look at it with all the dressing and everything added, the cheese and stuff, 1,800 calories. A day's worth of calories in one meal. So you know, all of this leads to weight gain. It's that fourth meal, you know, for a lot of people, the constant grazing, the eating late at night. We actually do need to give our bodies about 12 to 14 hours overnight to process the foods that we ate during the day. And it is at night that we make our muscle and we get rid of fat. It's while we sleep. So it's a very important time, and we need to give time for that processing. But a lot of people don't. So, and what happens when calories are too few? Well, it starts turning to both muscle and fat to find that energy to break down. So, and what's interesting is if someone's really not eating in about 3 days, you know, the metabolic rates will actually drop to a starvation level to try to preserve, you know, our bodies, thinking that we're starving ourselves. So even a lot of this calorie restriction, you know, gets a little frustrating for people over time because our body reacts to even calorie restrictions. So and the key with, if you really get at it, you know, nutrition deficiencies, instead of, I had a patient of mine just went on lemon water, a lemon water diet, and she ended up being hospitalized with kidney failure and passed out. And you know, obviously she had nutritional deficiencies, and she had, you know, it was dehydrated and her kidneys had failed. Thankfully, it all reversed. But she had just gone out there on her own and just said, you know, found something on the internet, said lemon water diet, you know. She had done it for over a month, which is the most amazing thing. That didn't happen earlier, but, you know, but she's lucky to be alive. A pound of fat, this is a general thing, a pound of fat is equal to about 3,500 calories. I mean, that's, you know, so if you consider you're trying to lose a pound a week, and you're having to figure out 500 calories reduction. That is if you don't change your activity. And this doesn't always work out, and definitely it's been difficult to calculate true calories in, calories out, and come up with net one way or the other, and what the weight gain or weight loss would be. And I don't think all calories are equal. I actually think there's a bit of mislabeling, you know, on some of the packaged foods. I mean, I really do, and they probably underreport calories, because that people saying, I know I eat, I can read the label and I can do this, and I'm sticking to this amount of calories, and they're just continuing to gain weight, you know. So there's all calories may not be equal. The processed calories, because they're processed, may be a little bit more. Well, everybody wants to know about burning fat. They want to know, how can I burn fat? We'll talk more about it, but there actually are hormones, and some of these hormones have been used to get people to lose weight. You'll notice there are 3 hormones: GLP-1 agonist, GIP, and glucagon, that actually can get release of both fat and sugar, and basically lead toward curbing appetite and also, getting people to lose weight. You've heard of those Ozempic, Mounjaro, that's the GLP-1 agonist, the injections, and that's the glucagon-like peptides. And of interest, a natural way to stimulate that is bulky, crunchy, fiber-filled plants. And so, the broccoli and kale and, things, any type of plant-based thing that gives stretch to the stomach will actually stimulate the release of GLP-1 naturally. And so but you can calculate the dose that people give weekly, and obviously there's a bigger line for people spending money on these types of medicines to lose weight. Well, it's interesting. We'll go into why that might help certain individuals a little bit more. And one of it may block the hunger signals, and that's a tough thing. And we'll talk about conditions of insulin resistance that get people kind of trapped in their body a bit. So these are interesting things that are being studied. Obviously, the pharmaceutical companies are taking advantage of what they've learned and actually giving it in injections. So we talked about there is this point in our bodies that we get into a cycle where insulin, we eat, it raises our blood sugar, which raises our insulin levels, which then stores any excess fat in muscle and more. We'll talk about where it does get stored. And then people, because they're just not getting any energy, the glucose into the cells, because they start getting insulin resistance, they feel tired. They get achy even, and they stay hungry. And so what do? They eat again. And it just becomes this constant cycle. And it's this getting trapped in your own body type experience. Kind of an alien species has taken over the hormones of the body and taken over our health in that process. So there is this problem of developing this unhealthy fat. This was some statistics from National Health and Nutrition survey, and it did talk about this presence of excess abdominal fat, even in patients with normal weight, and that's kind of an interesting stat. 70% of America is overweight or obese. We talked about 500 calories or more a day. Statistically, that we eat beyond what we need, and most of them we're snacking way too much. That fourth meal, as I was saying, and the snacking becomes a meal's worth of calories without it being a meal, and a lot of that is in excess sugar and fat that we're taking in. These are sugars in sodas, our ultra-processed snack foods, our fried foods, our fatty foods. I mean, we're just not, we're getting calories, but we're not getting nutrition. And this excess gets stored and begins stimulating higher and higher levels of insulin as the pancreas is trying to overcome our insulin resistance. This is a slide, some of y'all may have seen this before in the earlier talk that I did, but this was that rise of obesity, and this was only between the 1970s and 2014, and it's actually gotten worse. So it's over 40% obesity that we're seeing now, and this overweight is also around 40%, which is bad when you see for both men and women. This was the rise of diabetes, type 2 diabetes, over a period of time, and clearly, since the 1990s on, there's been this steeper curve that's been going on, and with this, I show this cheese consumption in the United States. Similar rise, and we've gone from where, actually back in the 80s may have been around, actually looking at this, it was in that, you know, there was about 20 pounds per year people were consuming 1980s. It's actually gone over 44 pounds a year per person in the United States for cheese consumption now. It's just, it's been a steady rise every single year. So let me discuss some of the reasons why that is. So these guys, these bad guys, these are the cigarette companies. R.J. Reynolds, you know, back in the 80s started losing some money. God forbid, they lost some money one year. Why? Well, less people were smoking, maybe more deaths that were happening. They met and they said, we got to diversify. Well, what are we going to go into? Well, let's go into foods. Well, let's go into what type of foods? Well, let's go into addictive foods, and we'll figure out which ones are the most addictive. And they actually went to the lab and figured out. Then they started buying the companies, the Nabiscos, the Oreos. You know, look at all the cracker. These are the Hawaiian Punch. Oh my gosh, the most staining thing for a kid. You know, and families, their rugs. You know, but the juice boxes, Lunchables, all these things, creating all these snacks for kids. They were creating addictive foods. Now they realize, actually, R.J. Reynolds realized when they started getting sued for cigarettes that we might get sued for food and all these snacks. Same reason. So they diversified. They actually sold the companies. They kept the stock. They have a little separate stock holding company, but their fiduciary responsibilities as owners is gone, so they can't get sued, and yet they still make money on all this. Philip Morris, Kraft, mac and cheese, oh my gosh, Jell-O, Kool-Aid, Oscar Mayer hot dogs, oh my gosh, you know, the hyper palatable addictive foods. The company became Altrua, Altria, you know, to change the name and not be a cigarette company. But they got out of the food business also, and now they're just into smokeless, you know, cigarettes, smokeless tobacco, and vaping. You know, but so they had gone in and figured out, actually on cheese, this is no joke, that a protein called casein is part of, you know, if you get a high enough level of that, it will be broken down into a casomorphine in the body, which actually will stimulate dopamine, all these factors for addiction. So they found that a certain amount of cheese that they gave people eating, they can make cheese addictive. And go back to that chart. They were good. And of course, what went on in a bad way? Unfortunately, insulin resistance, that curve of type 2 diabetes. This is all our insulin receptors in our muscle cells just not being responsive and us not taking in adequate sugar. And then the pancreas saying, oh, the levels are still up. I need a higher insulin level. So insulin levels just keep rising and rising and rising. Well, there's good and bad in that. One, it was trying to get the sugars down, but at one point, it can't be overcome. And I'll show a chart soon. And this was the problem that started going on. Is we started getting this intramuscular fat. And I've really done a deep dive into this. These are MRI of legs and basically the different grading for how much intramuscular fat. You know, the USDA, how do they rate beef? And that's why I showed beef on that's not human flesh, by the way. But that's beef. And the USDA ratings has 8 ratings. And what's prime? It's highly marbled beef. The most marbled, then choice, and then on down the line till you get into something that probably looks more athletic, you know, with low fat within the muscle. Well, this is human stuff to the left. You know, that's real beef on the right, but we're getting marbled, and this marbling is setting up for our insulin resistance. It's also marbling the liver. Liver can, you know, it starts getting taken over. I had a friend of mine tell me that his liver was 50% fat now, and he's a physician, and I'm like, well, what are you gonna do about it? And he goes, well, what am I supposed to do about it? I said, well, you got to change what you're eating. You got to change your activity. You got to lose some weight. And you know, otherwise, this sets up in the liver. And that's this, you know, you get this nice, healthy liver without marbling. You get this highly marbled, fatty liver. And then you start getting stages that lead to cirrhosis of the liver. Fatty liver is the #1 cause of liver failure in the United States right now. And this is not from alcohol. This is just from food. And so you get all these different levels, and you know, I've had several patients recently have liver transplants, gone down to Shands and requiring liver transplants. It's horrible. The liver does so much for the body that failure of the liver is just horrible. Well, it happens in the pancreas too. We start getting fat, you know, marbling the pancreas. It starts happening to the heart, in and around the heart. We can see the fat in the pericardium, we see fat in the muscle. It actually is probably one of the causes of atrial fibrillation now that's going on, is fat getting stored where fat shouldn't be stored. So, yeah, it is. Yeah. So let's go back. Insulin. What's insulin? It's made in the beta islet cells of the pancreas. Release insulin. Insulin is like a lock and key to the muscle to let energy be used, to allow our muscles to get nice, healthy energy, and we're able to do things, you know, because of that. But what happens where insulin can't find those receptors? The lock and key doesn't happen. Well, unfortunately, that's what leads to higher and higher insulin levels, you know, over time. We can overcome some of that with activity, you know, that our muscles themselves will unlock. And this is at a cellular level, the GLUT4. I mean, I know I'm going to go down just a little bit, but somehow our mitochondria, which is kind of the brain cell in the middle of any cell, it knows to send this GLUT4 receptor up to the surface when it needs sugar to come in, and it knows once the insulin is locked into the insulin receptor that it's time to bring in that sugar. And if it doesn't rise to the surface, it doesn't take in that blood sugar. So the sugars stay high, the insulin levels stay high. It's really interesting, and a lot of stuff starts going on. There's a lot of tests for insulin resistance. One of them is a glucose tolerance test. Women will have undergone that during pregnancy. And it's probably the first time someone will see that their blood sugars are staying up at 1 hour and 2 hours after, and they try to adjust the nutrition of the person. Why? Because high blood sugars for a mother will lead to a larger size baby and more complications with delivery because it's too big a baby to be delivered. So so you know, that's the earliest detections of insulin resistance, is people having high sugars or the glucose intolerance of pregnancy. And it happens other times. People have come into the hospital with an illness and the sugars are way up, you know, and they spike. Why is that? Well, it's more about that they are insulin resistant. You can measure an insulin level and measure that. You measure what's called a C-peptide level, and that actually is how functional is the pancreas itself. That's a real later thing. When the pancreas starts to fail, then someone needs truly insulin replacement to come in, and C-peptide levels start you know, getting abnormal. There is a way to calculate an insulin resistant calculation called, and it uses both blood sugars and insulin levels simultaneously. There are lactate levels, and what is lactate? Well, lactate is an acid that the muscles in the body produce when they've gone beyond their oxygen carrying level. They're having to go from aerobic capacity to anaerobic. And when it does that, lactate starts to build up. Well, for athletes, it can be, takes a long time for lactate to start building up. The marathon runners, they can just run 4.5 minute miles for 26 miles and keep a smile on their face. I mean, how do they do that? They're not getting lactate. As soon as somebody running track run too fast gets lactate, muscles start not working. They're not running as fast. They hurt. It burns. Guess what happens? You can actually, in some patients with insulin resistance, you can measure lactate levels as soon as they start moving around. They're running, their daily activity has high lactate levels. It means that they're, talk about out of shape. I mean, it's just, and it's it happens over time, but people can get so deconditioned. We talked about stages of leading up to pre-diabetes and diabetes that are measurable with glucose tolerance tests. So you basically get a 70 milligram sugar load. Glucola is what's usually used, and then you get a baseline 1 hour and 2 hour levels of blood sugar. Continuous glucose monitors for people can actually do that and not have to have blood draws. These numbers start getting progressively abnormal as we're heading toward prediabetes. So these are actually measurable early, and some of the earliest times people have had it, especially like I said for women, is pregnancy, and they'll do these tests. So this is glucose tolerance test. Of interest, I'll show some, and this is hemoglobin A1C, which is a 90-day or 3-month average of your blood sugar. That's how they, the hemoglobin A1C, the levels can actually, you can look at a 6.5 and know that your average blood sugar was actually 153. So sometimes when people say, well, you're under 7, that's good, everything else. Well, your average was 163. Wouldn't you like to be back toward the 5.5? I mean, 118 more of an average, more what seems like a healthier average. So it's interesting, what do these numbers mean? I've begun thinking, and this is just a statement to myself, that atherogenesis, or basically coronary artery disease, is probably, and I wrote postprandial disorder. This is a condition that happens in the hours after we eat. It's not about fasting, and what do? We get all our blood, our blood work done fasting. What is our blood work like? What do our triglycerides go to? What are other lipids go to? What are other measurable things that we can measure after we eat? And when does it come back to normal? How long does it take to come back to normal? Amazingly, there was somebody, Joel Furman, who wrote a book called Fast Food Genocide, and he actually did these measurements after people went through fast food. And some of those numbers didn't come back toward normal for 8 hours after they went through fast food. Just think of somebody going 3 times a day through fast food. It's like a hammer keeps hitting their knee, and the swelling never goes down before they hit it again. That's the type of thing going. Glucose tolerance test, the equivalents, I just letting you know, it's like a Coca-Cola 12 ounce with the, it basically, there's 39, so you have 2 of those, and that would equal you could have a 20 ounce Coke, and that's like 5 little Debbies of all things, the equivalency of sugar. So it's a lot of sugar that they give in this bolus load, and then watch what happens. And it's amazing that not all of us are going sky high for a while, but as you saw, not everybody does that. There's sugar in a lot of things. here's the different types of sugar out there: sucrose, table sugar; fructose, more fruit sugars; glucose, that's the simple sugar, and that's more the building blocks even for other carbohydrates. Lactose, we forget that lactose is a milk sugar, and so milk has sugar, and it's not just protein, it is sugar and protein, and it's a disaccharide of galactose and glucose. And so all calories, you know, of any type can lead to, you know, elevated blood glucose levels. We talked about insulin levels, measuring them. This is it's excellent if it's below 5. It's, you know, healthy, but trying to get people back toward is below 7. I think we all should be excellent, but the increased risk is 10 or above. So we start getting that higher. Of all things, people can have insulin levels that are 400 times normal. That's how ridiculous their insulin levels can get. And so, you know, think of a level 5 times 400. I mean, 2,000. Horrible. So C-peptide levels are measurements of the pancreas and how well it's functioning. So if the levels are greater than 2, I think that's, let me make sure I'm looking at it right. Yeah, greater than 4. So it's 4 or above, it's functioning normal. If it's in that 2 to 4 range, then you're getting some degree of damage. And if it's less than 2, then the pancreas is severely damaged. This is a calculation for what's called the HOMA-IR insulin resistance. And it's basically using insulin and glucose and multiplying it together and dividing that by whatever units they were using. There's a factor that's divided, so it is a calculated number. We talked about resting lactate or lactate levels, and this is when you're going around in this anaerobic condition, and for some people that can be at rest. That is another term for it is VO2 max, or what level we convert from being aerobic to anaerobic. And you can calculate that on an exercise tolerance test, getting a stress test. You can calculate what the estimated VO2 max was from that. This was more of a research level. There were some measurements of what's called alpha hydroxybutyrate, and this may be coming on in the setting where you get these oxidative things that oxidize lipids and this is an area that I think may be the early stage for where insulin resistance may start, is based on certain foods that we eat. These ultra processed fast foods, they actually are inflammatory, and these actually can oxidize our lipids in different ways, and the healthier foods are reducing agents, and unhealthy foods are oxidizing. And it's interesting that meats, especially meats that have a lot of blood in them, or beef, you know, or hamburger, you know, type meats, are more, we react in a bad way to that. Our bodies react in a more inflammatory way, and this oxidative effect on our lipids can happen. And say, well, why is that important? I'll make sure there may be a slide coming up here that'll explain that more. Continuous blood glucose monitors, kind of interesting. I've seen some physicians wearing them around. It's not always because they have diabetes. They want to know what's going on with their activity and what they eat and what their blood sugars are doing. I've seen that on a few people wearing them around. When we develop insulin resistance, we develop this full-fledged metabolic syndrome, and our triglycerides start going up, our blood sugars going up, we have abnormal glucose tolerance tests, our triglycerides go up, our insulin levels go up, our fat storage starts going up, so we get more higher percent fat. And then we can measure that by DEXA scans or the BIA. Resting lactate levels start going up, and of course just the scale. We can our BMI starts going up. I do think there is a scary thing that also is not listed there is our muscle goes down. Fat level may be going up, or our muscle is going down and getting more marbled. So I think there needs to be a test out there developed that allows us to more easily see marbling of the muscle. And I've got a few contacts with GE to talking about ultrasounding legs and looking at even a rating, way of quantitating intramuscular fat, and how do we get rid of it? How do we get rid of the best? And we're going to talk about that. Okay. Oxidation, once again, is a bad thing. It leads to just bad things in the body. Let's get to what everybody always wants to ask: how do I get rid of it? How do I burn this stuff? Well, these are 12 ways at least listed. Clearly doing strength training. Use of weights, helpful. Following a higher protein diet, lower fat, lower carbohydrate type diet. Getting more sleep. Of course, eating more unsaturated fats than these saturated fats that we're going to get from animal products. Saturated fats are from animal products. Cheese, obviously, up there, 80% fat. And that's a saturated fat. So 80% saturated fat when you have cheese. Need to drink more water. Give up the sugary beverages. Increase fiber, especially a whole food plant-based fiber that you can get. Whole grains, not so refined and processed. Increase moving, walking, any form of activity. Of all things, coffee. It was, but not a lot of coffee. I was found, it's not that, but a little bit of coffee actually. I did that talk on caffeine and coffee, and there was some beneficial effects in many ways for burning fat for those that had 1 to 2 cups a day of coffee, not more. You won't sleep. You need to sleep. The intermittent fasting, probiotics discussed. Of activities, some of these high intensity interval training, or these 1 minute of a faster, more intense burst of activity, and then back to what you were doing, and then back to the higher intensity, and then recovery back to what you were doing. Some of that actually can help. There's no pill out there yet that just burns fat. A lot of places will say, order this or that, and you'll look at the fat loss that's happened. It's just not happened. Unfortunately, even with these other products, we're talking about the Ozempics and the Mounjaro injections, people are losing fat and muscle as they have restricted their calories. It does make them restrict calories, but a lot of different things can do that. I just throw in a picture of swimming because that's what I like. But you can mix up strokes, use multiple muscles. There is a negative about swimming that is cold water stimulates appetite. So you have to watch out for that after the swim, that you will go consume anything that's out there for a bit. And some among swimmers, it's well known that people have had the evening swims and had much bigger meals in the evening. Well, to conclude all of this, and then open up for questions. Our insulin resistance is a combination of overconsumption and inactivity. It's just there's no two ways about it. It is a problem of fat getting stored where fat shouldn't be stored. And I showed you all the different places the body has to figure out to store fat over time. At a microscopic level, it may start out with this mitochondria getting affected by lipid oxidation, and some of this oxidation is is an interesting study in how to actually avoid it. And of course, a nutritional approach would be more plants, and less saturated fat, and less of the things that are known to be oxidative to foods, and in foods as well to the body. How do we get rid of insulin resistance once? Well, at a cellular level, I showed that slide. The mitochondria gets affected. The GLUT4 can't rise to the surface. Insulin can't find things, and everything goes dysfunctional. Higher insulin levels create higher fat accumulation in not only any type of fat cells that are around, and it will transfer even between the muscle cells, fat cells, heart cells. The muscle, there is an interesting transfer of glucose that can happen from muscle contraction, and so activity helps to lower blood sugars. And in fact, that 1 hour after eating is a good time to go keep moving, not to just go sit. Over time, overstimulation of the pancreas can lead to, I write this word term, apoptosis or death. I mean, basically, it's scarring the pancreas down, and at one point, you can measure that, the C-peptide levels drop, and people need insulin. The earlier insulin resistance, the earlier it can be detected, the more potential for reversal and cure. And type 2 diabetes is curable, before that later burnout phase, with the pancreas, scarring down. So lifestyle changes, nutrition, physical activity, medications alone don't reverse insulin resistance. People put people on metformin. Well, it can change a little bit the response of the body, but it's not changing the fact that insulin resistance exists. We can be on a lot of medicines to lower our blood sugars, but if insulin resistance is still there, the problem is still around and needs to work. It's interesting, bariatric surgery for weight loss does reverse insulin resistance, and it's been shown kind of interesting that it does it even the best and better than so far medicines that have been out there. But we are getting these newer medicines that are coming about. Any detection of organ fat accumulation should be a big warning, for future organ dysfunction and injury. And so that's liver, pancreas, muscle, heart. Pericardial fat is common when we see it with echo, or even seen on CT and MRI. And so you should ask, cardiologists, do I have measurable fat around my heart? I mean, it's an interesting question. They probably know it, but sometimes not realizing. I think we've seen it for years with echo and just said, we've called it a fat pad. There's this fat pad seen. And so, and one last comment that these injectables are out there. They're reducing hunger. They're slowing gastric emptying, but where people are losing. They're restricting calories. If they don't do the activity along with it or learn actually over time how to eat well, then they're just going to need a medicine like that lifelong. And that's, some people plan to do that, and that's really interesting. But I wish there were more educational settings that we just taught people how to plan, how to shop, how to cook, how to store, how to prepare things. I've seen that type of shared group activity going on in a place in Atlanta when I was moonlighting in a weight loss reduction clinic of all things. So, but it was the best run clinic in the nation because once they got people to go away, in 1 year they had 95% of their individuals were within 5 pounds of their goal weight in that maintenance period of 1 year, and A lot of places have a hard time reproducing that. Doing it on your own is hard. So sometimes you do need a dietitian, coach, or group, that may do it together. With that, enough beating up fat. I'm sorry. Maybe I'll talk more about muscle next time. But open up for questions. Yes.
For someone who's pre-diabetic, what is the best statin? Because I've been reading lately that statins aggravate diabetes.
It's an interesting thing that of the certain ones, the atorvastatin was one that actually set up people. There was an association. There is yet to be a cause and effect, but there was an association of some individuals going on it that over time they also found out that they had pre-diabetes or later diabetes. And, I don't know if we could go back in all of that, whether it was truly the medicine or the condition for which they were being treated. Because I think a lot more was going on under the surface. The things I was talking about today, that people could be going along in those early stages before they even declared pre-diabetic, but they had insulin resistance already, and they didn't know it. And so all of these things start going on at the same time. High blood pressure, lipid abnormalities, finally detectable coronary disease. All these things start happening. The associations with even dementia, similar type things. It's really interesting. It's I'll revisit, dementia. I know I gave a talk on it, and it was well attended here, but we'll probably revisit it because I keep learning more, in that setting, and even those overlap things in the brain. But when we treat the heart, we treat the brain. But I think a lot of this, the enemy underneath all of it is undetected insulin resistance. And that may have been going on in some of those. So didn't answer, it was atorvastatin of all things that in the early studies of it, they started seeing in studies a certain level of people also starting to have type 2 diabetes. Well, was it directly the medicine or was it their medical condition? Yes?
As your A1C comes down, your insulin resistance then is coming.
It is dropping, that's right. So you're getting better. So you're starting to get more insulin sensitive.
Oh, okay.
So that, and so, if you can sensitize your cells in your body to start recognizing insulin again, now you're starting to take in the sugar, now you start to get the more energy, your muscles get less achy, you want to do more. I mean, it's a reversal process, and yet getting through those initial things, that's why I really do. Yeah, I know I get fixated on this ultrasound a little bit, but I do want to see. I think if we combine in cardiac rehab, actually our BIA data with ultrasound data, the legs, and we started out there. We've seen a lot of low muscle, high fat states, especially in the legs, in over this past year. It's really been interesting, and so is that going to be the best guide? Well, a little bit. We can see percent, fat to percent muscle, and a fat to muscle ratio. I think is going to be interesting. But what if we can directly visualize it? Just taking ultrasound and viewing the leg. Oh my gosh! The difference between I don't have the slide up there, but I think you've got it shows the athletic muscle versus the kind of sarcopenic obesity muscle, where there's a lot of a rim of fat, but there's all that marbling, and amazingly even the bone is smaller. Look at it again. Go look at that. But there's a reason the bone is smaller. The bone hasn't even been stimulated. So as we go inactive and we sit, or say an astronaut goes out in space and is weightless, they start losing the bone. They lose muscle, they lose bone. You got you got inactivity combined with calorie excess. It's just going to be a storage problem. So it's going to find places to store it. What does a cow do? A cow in processing, you got this vegetarian cow, ruminator, chewing on grass, eating, free range. Then they bring it into a processing center. What do they do in the processing center? Immobilize it. They don't allow it to have activity. But what do they feed it? If it's Iowa corn, which is they're not munching on our corn walking around the fields. But in there they get this corn head, and what is that now? It's fructose. High sugar, So they fatten them up, they marbleize them, and they actually ultrasound them, of all things, until they get to the right level of marbling.
No.
And then they know
They're ready.
they're ready. Send them off.
Praise God.
Or they get they get that prime beef rating.
Mobilized.
They're gonna kill us, Doc.
They are killing it.
You follow me?
Yeah, I'm afraid I do.
I think it's in those terms that even some cardiologists have gotten it. I've been talking to them, and I don't think that rating's out there. Dr. Arthur Agassiz, years ago, preventive cardiologist in South Beach, Miami, started working with industry to come up with a coronary calcification rating, of the heart. Found that CT picked up real quick, so he came up with this ultra-fast CT that really gave a calcium score. Well, that score became the Agassiz scoring thing for basically, if it was 0, then you had no calcium, and you're lower risk. Your score was 1,000, and you could see the vessels it was involving. Then you knew you were very high risk, for having multi-vessel involvement. Well, what about a intramuscular, fat rating for us, and a risk rating based on that for developing insulin resistance? And insulin resistance is the troublemaker that's going to lead to progressive atherosclerosis. So, we'll call it the Smith rating. No. But I'm working with them. I'll call it anything. If someone helps me, bring it about. So, someone knows. But we're people with GE. There's somebody, a rep in Jacksonville. He's going to get back with me after, and I'd like to see if they'd send us something to do on a loaner for a while. So if anybody wants to volunteer, I know I'm a volunteer.
With the ultrasound?
Yeah.
Combine it with the VA and just see what it looks like. Yeah.
Does the amount of potassium in a banana have any adverse effect on beta blockers?
No. Yeah,
I can enjoy my banana.
You can enjoy it. Yeah.
Well, I'm going back to it.
Okay, all right. You're welcome. Anything else? So so over time, you look at that picture and think, yeah.
You mentioned with echo and talk to your cardiologist, you have a fat pad around it. Do you
Right.
actually routinely look at that when you do an echo?
Yeah.
Is it in the report?
It
When I look
would
at
be,
echo-
at least I put it in the report,
Okay.
that there is pericardial fat. I mean, there's pericardial fat present. I wanted, there actually are CTs done of the heart and actually MRIs done of the heart. And from those actually, there is the presence or absence seen also. And of course, people get an atrial fib ablations. I actually would love a study that really deals with intramuscular fat of the atrium and picking up on it for atrial fib. And so I think, definitely the lifestyle changes have been seen to lower atrial fib rates, especially post-ablation.
So if you decrease your fat consumption and you're looking at saturated fats, how do
remove all the fat that's in these organs.
Well, remember, just, you know, this happened in the American Heart Association diet. They went on a low-fat diet, you know, it says low-fat diet. Well, what happened, and was a response to this, was why Dr. Agatston had to come up with the South Beach diet, was carbohydrate consumption went way up. It was unrestricted. So, you know, anytime you take them, you know, in those macro divisions, if you're going to get a certain, you know, balance that's going to happen. You know, but so if you go low fat, make sure you're going higher in the protein and more plant protein, you know, in doing that. Because if you go more protein from the animal, you're getting fat. And that's the whole thing. There's only one way to really go low fat, high protein, lower carb. It's plant based. And it is. And that doesn't mean you have to be all vegetarian, but the predominance on that plate has to be from the ground. And the closer to the real food, the better.
Can we get this program, you've got it up here, can we get it on our computer?
Oh, that's interesting. We'll find out. Yeah. Let's stop
I'd
here.
like to know how to
Okay.
get that, so my wife can read that.
Also the PowerPoint too.
Yeah. So yeah.